3 years ago, I drove into an isolated town hidden deep in rural Missouri to investigate what people online called a secret cult. At the time, I was running a small horror investigation channel online. Most of my content involved abandoned towns, strange disappearances, and urban legends that people claimed were real. Usually, the stories turned out to be exaggerated internet myths, creepy on the surface, but harmless underneath. Black Hollow felt different from the beginning. The first thing that caught my attention was an email sent from an anonymous address at 2:14 in the morning. There was no subject line, no greeting, and no signature, just one sentence. If Black Hollow invites you in, don't stay after dark. Normally, I would have ignored something like that. But after searching the town name online, I found dozens of deleted forum posts talking about strange activity in the area. People mentioned missing hikers, unexplained lights in the forest, and residents behaving like they were hiding something. A few users called it a cult. Others claimed the town worshipped something in the woods, but one detail appeared again and again. The people of Black Hollow weren't trying to keep outsiders away from the town. They were trying to keep something else from leaving the forest. That sentence stayed in my head for days. The town barely existed on maps. Population 612. One road in, one road out. Deep in the Missouri Ozarks, surrounded by endless forest, no nearby cities, no cell towers for miles. I drove there alone in late October. The deeper I went into Missouri, the more isolated the roads became. Gas stations disappeared, streetlights vanished. Eventually, the GPS signal started cutting out every few minutes. By sunset, the road ahead of me was completely surrounded by trees. That's when the radio started acting strangely. At first it sounded like static. Then I realized there were voices hidden inside it, not singing, not talking, chanting. The voices were low and rhythmic, almost blending into the interference. Every few seconds, the signal would clear just enough for me to hear something that sounded almost human before disappearing again. I shut the radio off. A few miles later, I saw the sign. Welcome to Black Hollow. The sign itself looked old and weather-damaged, but what caught my attention were the words carved underneath. Don't go inside. At that point, I seriously considered turning around, but curiosity won. The town itself looked completely normal when I arrived. Small houses, a church, a diner, old pickup trucks parked outside quiet homes. It looked like every other rural American town I'd ever passed through. But something felt wrong immediately. Nobody locked their doors. Almost every house had the front door partially open, even after dark. People stared at me for slightly too long. And no matter where I went, I got the strange feeling that everyone already knew who I was. I checked into a small roadside motel near the edge of town. The woman behind the counter never asked for identification. She just handed me a room key and quietly said, "Don't answer if you hear knocking tonight." I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking. She didn't laugh back. Later that night, I walked into the diner across the street, hoping to get answers. The place was nearly empty, except for a few older locals drinking coffee in silence. The moment I mentioned the forest outside town, the room became completely quiet. Nobody looked at me, nobody reacted. It was like they were pretending they hadn't heard the question at all. That was the first moment I genuinely felt uncomfortable. An older man sitting near the window finally spoke. "You shouldn't go near those woods after sunset." His name was Walter Boone. He looked exhausted. Deep wrinkles, bloodshot eyes. The kind of face that looked permanently sleep-deprived. When I asked why everyone seemed afraid of the forest, Walter stared at me for several seconds before answering. "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "it learns your voice." I thought he was feeding into the local legend. Then he asked me something that made my stomach drop. "Did you hear knocking last night?" I hadn't told anyone about that, because around 2 in the morning, while lying awake in my motel room, I had heard 3 slow knocks on the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just 3 calm knocks. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Walter leaned closer. "Never answer knocking after midnight." "Why?" I asked. He looked toward the dark forest outside the diner windows. "Because sometimes it remembers your voice." That was the moment I realized the people in Black Hollow weren't pretending. They were terrified, and somehow, I was already involved. The next morning, Black Hollow looked peaceful. Sunlight filled the streets. Children rode bicycles near the church. Elderly couples sat outside their homes drinking coffee. If someone had dropped me into the town without context, I would have assumed it was completely ordinary. That made everything worse. Fear feels more believable when it hides inside normal places. I spent most of the morning filming the town and talking to residents. But nobody would answer questions about the forest. Every conversation ended the same way. The moment I mentioned the woods, people either changed the subject or walked away entirely. Around noon, I found Walter sitting outside a hardware store cleaning an old hunting rifle. He seemed nervous to see me. "You should leave before sunset," he said immediately. I asked him if Black Hollow was actually a cult. Walter laughed softly. "If we were a cult," he said, "we wouldn't still be alive." Then he handed me an old photograph. At first glance, it looked harmless. A group of townspeople standing near the edge of the forest sometime in the late 1980s. But something in the background caught my attention. A figure standing between the trees, tall, pale, barely visible. Every person in the photograph was staring directly at it, not the camera, the thing behind them. I asked Walter who the figure was. He took the photograph back almost immediately. "We don't say its name," he whispered. That sentence bothered me more than I expected. Not because it sounded dramatic, because he sounded sincere. That evening, despite every warning I'd received, I decided to drive toward the forest. Part of me still believed the town was exaggerating things. Maybe there really had been disappearances years ago. Maybe the isolation created paranoia. Small towns often build myths around tragedy. I brought a flashlight, my camera equipment, and a handgun I legally carried during investigations. The moment I stepped beneath the trees, the atmosphere changed. The forest felt unnaturally quiet. No insects, no birds, no wind, just silence. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Somewhere deeper in the woods. I followed the sound for almost 15 minutes before noticing the bells. Hundreds of them hung from tree branches all around me. Old rusted bells tied with strips of faded red cloth. Some tiny, some enormous. The wind caused them to rattle softly. It sounded almost like whispering. Later, I learned every family in Black Hollow hung bells in the woods for the same reason, to hear it moving. That thought didn't fully register until much later. I continued walking until my flashlight landed on something strange. A wooden structure hidden deep among the trees. Not a cabin, not a shed, something older. The wood was covered in carved symbols and animal bones hung from the roof beams. At first I assumed it belonged to the supposed cult. Then I noticed the symbols weren't religious. They were warnings. Somebody had carved the same phrase repeatedly into the wood. "Keep it out." I suddenly heard movement behind me. I spun around with the flashlight. Nothing, but for a split second, I was certain someone had been standing there. That's when my camera started malfunctioning. The footage skipped frames. The audio distorted. And somewhere in the static, I heard something speaking. At first it sounded like Walter. "Over here," I called back instinctively. No response. Then the voice came again. "Closer, please hurry." I froze, because Walter had never followed me into the woods. I slowly raised the flashlight toward the trees, and that's when I saw it. A silhouette standing impossibly still between the trunks. Too tall, too thin. The moment the flashlight touched it, the figure moved behind another tree with unnatural speed. Not running, sliding, like something pretending to understand human movement without fully getting it right. Every bell in the forest suddenly began ringing. All at once, the sound exploded around me so violently that I dropped the flashlight into the mud. For several seconds, I couldn't see anything except darkness between the trees. Then I started hearing footsteps, slow, careful, circling me, not crashing through leaves like an animal, walking. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it wildly between the trees. Nothing, but every time the beam moved away from a certain area, I had the horrible feeling something had been standing there a second earlier. Then I noticed another sound, breathing, close enough that it almost sounded beside my ear. I spun around, still nothing. That's when the forest stopped feeling empty. It felt crowded, like something was hiding behind nearly every tree watching me. My flashlight suddenly landed on strange markings carved into the bark around me. Tall vertical scratches, deep enough to expose pale wood underneath. Some were nearly 8 feet high. No animal I knew could have reached that far. Then the voice spoke again. Only this time it didn't sound like Walter anymore. It sounded exactly like my father. He had died 5 years earlier. "Help me." The words came softly from deeper in the forest. For one horrifying second, my body actually started moving toward the sound automatically. That terrified me more than anything else. The voice didn't just sound real. It felt emotionally real, like hearing someone you loved calling for help. Then the bells stopped. Instantly, the silence afterward was unbearable. And from somewhere directly behind me, I heard my own voice whisper, "Turn around." I didn't. I ran. I ran. Branches tore against my jacket as I sprinted through the woods, toward the road. Behind me, the bells continued ringing violently, echoing through the trees, like warning alarms. But the footsteps behind me never sounded hurried. That terrified me most. Whatever was following me didn't need to rush. When I finally reached my truck, I threw myself inside and locked the doors. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe properly. Then I looked toward the forest edge and saw it standing there. The headlights only illuminated part of its body, tall, pale, completely motionless. Its limbs looked slightly too long, like human proportions, stretched in the wrong places. And even from that distance, I could tell it was smiling. I drove back to town immediately. That night, I replayed my footage repeatedly inside the motel room. Most of it was corrupted. Frames missing, audio distortion, visual static. But every so often, hidden between glitches, the figure appeared again, always closer to the camera than I remembered. Around 2:13 a.m., the knocking returned. 3 slow knocks, exactly like before. I stayed completely silent. Then the door handle began turning, very slowly. I stared at it without moving. Another knock, then a voice whispered through the door, "Let me in." My stomach dropped, because the voice sounded exactly like mine, not similar. Identical. I backed away from the door while the handle continued moving gently. Then everything stopped. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. The next morning I went directly to Walter. For the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, he looked genuinely frightened. "It followed you back," he said. That was when the town finally explained the truth. Black Hollow wasn't hiding a cult. The rituals, the bells, the midnight rules. All of it existed to contain something beneath the forest. According to town records, miners discovered a cavern system underneath the woods in 1912. 3 men survived the collapse. None of them ever fully recovered. Within weeks, residents started hearing familiar voices outside their homes late at night. At first, the thing only copied sounds. Then it learned words. Eventually, it learned people. Families reported hearing loved ones calling from the woods. Children disappeared after opening doors at night. Entire search parties vanished inside the forest. Over time, the town created rules. Never answer knocking after midnight. Never follow familiar voices into the woods. Never say its name. And never invite it inside. The realization hit me like ice water. I had spoken back to it. Maybe that was enough. The entire town seemed to shift after sunset. Doors closed earlier. Windows were covered. Streets emptied almost completely. Nobody wanted to be outside. Walter insisted I leave immediately. But before I packed my things, I reviewed the forest footage one final time. That's when I noticed something horrifying. There were extra voices hidden beneath the audio, not random sounds. Conversations, people whispering, repeating my own words back to me seconds later, almost like something practicing speech. Then I slowed one clip frame by frame. The figure in the woods appeared much closer than I remembered, standing directly behind me, watching. I nearly shut the laptop off right there. Instead, I kept digging. Walter finally admitted that Black Hollow had tried to abandon the town decades earlier. It failed. People who left reported hearing voices outside their homes hundreds of miles away. Some disappeared. Others returned to Black Hollow willingly. According to Walter, the thing didn't simply stay in the woods. It attached itself to people, especially outsiders. "Why outsiders?" I asked. He looked exhausted, because nobody would believe us if locals started disappearing. Around midnight, the knocking started again. This time it came from the motel window instead of the door. 3 taps. Slow. Deliberate. I forced myself not to look outside. Then the voice whispered, "Please." It sounded exactly like Walter Boone. Then it changed. The voice became my mother, then my brother, then me. Each voice sounded perfectly real. That terrified me more than anything physical could have. Eventually, the sounds stopped. I stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, I packed my equipment and left Black Hollow. Nobody tried stopping me. The townspeople only watched silently from their porches. Walter stood beside the road as I drove away. Before I left, he leaned into the truck window. "If you hear knocking after midnight," he said, "don't answer it." Then he stepped back. I never saw him again. The drive home felt endless. Every gas station, every dark road, every reflection in the mirror made me paranoid. But nothing happened. For a while. 3 nights later, I heard knocking outside my house. 3 slow knocks. Exactly the same rhythm. I froze immediately. Then came the voice. "Open the door, Walter Boone." I looked through the peephole. Nobody was outside. Another knock. This time the voice sounded exactly like me. Not similar. Perfect. My own voice asking to be let inside. I backed away from the door slowly. The handle started turning, then stopped. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Over the next few weeks, the knocking continued. Never every night. Never predictable. Always after midnight. 3 slow knocks. Sometimes from the front door. Sometimes from the bedroom window. Sometimes from walls where there shouldn't have been anything outside at all. The voices changed constantly. Friends, family, people I hadn't spoken to in years. One night I heard my dead grandfather calling my name from outside the kitchen window. That was the first moment I almost answered. I stopped making videos shortly afterward. I couldn't focus. I barely slept. Every recording device in my house started capturing strange audio distortions late at night, whispering repeated phrases. My own voice speaking while I was asleep. Then things became worse. I started finding muddy footprints around the house every morning. Bare human footprints. Too long, too thin. Leading toward the woods behind my property. One night, I finally checked the security cameras. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the footage showed a tall figure standing motionless near the front porch. Its body looked almost human, almost. But the proportions were wrong. Its arms hung too low. Its neck tilted unnaturally. And even through the grainy footage, I could see the smile, wide, frozen, watching the house. The figure never moved for nearly 40 minutes before walking calmly toward the woods. I contacted Black Hollow again. No answer. Then I searched online. Almost every trace of the town had disappeared. Deleted posts, missing records, broken maps. Even the motel listing was gone, like it had been erased. Then I checked the final forest footage and saw something terrifying. Behind the figure was me, standing beside it. Before I even entered the woods. Now I hear knocking sometimes, always after midnight. Always 3 slow knocks. And the voice outside always sounds like me. I never open the door. But last night, I heard it whisper from inside the house.